So today I want to talk about disruption, and the idea came from an earlier webinar that I ran where I was talking about disruption, and I was talking about the external forces that can disrupt a business. And somebody asked me, because I was talking about this idea of how do you ensure that you're not vulnerable to those disruptive forces. And one of the things that you can do is disrupt yourself, because and disrupt yourself is really saying innovate, because disruption and innovation are really two sides of the same coin. It's disruption when it happens to you, it's innovation when you do it yourself. So I want to talk about innovation today, but also what are the sort of things that are best for you to prioritize when it comes to innovating. My friend Shane Kempton and I are running this new program called Business Accelerators. It's a monthly group mentoring and training program running in Perth, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this webinar, so that if you want to be involved at a more in-depth level, and you happen to be lucky enough to be living in Perth, we're starting off in Perth, then I'll tell you a little bit more about that program at the end. But even otherwise, I hope you get some value from this for yourself in being ready for some of the disruptive forces that could be coming your way, so that you can innovate in order to stay ahead of the game. One of the quotations that I often show at the start of many of my webinars now is this one by Upton Sinclair. He said it's difficult to get somebody to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. And I think this is so true now, and it's not only people in salaried positions, it's business owners, it's leaders who have some assets, they've got some strengths, they've got some resources that they don't want to get rid of and they don't want to let go of, even if letting go is the right way to do it. And so it's very easy to believe that disruption is not going to affect you, that change is not going to affect you, or maybe not going to affect you as much as it's going to affect somebody else, especially when you've got things riding on it. So I'll just ask you for the next 40 minutes to lay aside perhaps some of the preconceived notions that you have and some of the things that you're holding on to, and look at what might disrupt you and your business and your industry. Let me give you some quick examples. I'm sure you've seen some of these before. So the taxi industry versus Uber. Taxi industry was highly regulated, highly controlled, had a really strong position, and then Uber came along. It was illegal in many places. Sometimes in some places still is, but it provided such a compelling experience that people forced governments and society to change to make it legal. The other industry that many people talk about is the hotel industry versus Airbnb. Again, a highly regulated industry, but now councils and local jurisdictions are legislating to allow things like Airbnb. We saw this in consumer goods with Blockbuster, with video and DVD sales, and then suddenly they're disrupted by Netflix, where on an app, you can now get access to what used to be available only through places like driving to a video store, checking that it was on the shelf, by renting it, driving back home, watching it, then returning it before the due date. And Netflix got rid of all of that and made it available to you by the click of a button on your phone or on your TV remote control. So those are some big examples of disruption. But disruption is happening in many industries and many businesses, probably including yours. It's certainly happening in mine. I'll give you an example of that soon. But before we do that, I wonder, how ready are you for disruption? So I've got a poll here, and the poll is, how ready are you for disruption? I'm going to ask you just to rate yourself. So let me launch the poll so you can see the options here, and you can now tick one of those 5 options. So if you haven't done the polls before, they're very easy. Just choose one of the options. Just tick the one that you think most applies to you. This is anonymous. I'll show the results later, but I'll show the aggregate results. So as you can see here, from 1 to 5, 1 is you just can't think about it because you're too busy in your day-to-day work, all the way up to that you're going to be the disruptors. So bring it. It's even better than bring it on. So bring it on is saying, yep, we're ready for disruption. Number 5 is saying we're going to be the disruptors. Okay, so most people have voted. That's good. I think we're up to 70% now, so I usually leave it till about 80% and then give you one last chance. Okay, great. So we're at 80%, so I'll close the poll in 3 seconds if you want to get your last chance to have a vote. Okay, right. Okay, so I've run this poll a number of times in webinars and with in-person audiences as well, and generally people say it's actually not surprising to see these results here. Okay, so in this group, and remember it's a self-selecting group because you're here because you're interested in this, in disrupting yourself, you're going to say you're going to be the disruptors. Great. And I hope that you will be in your business today and perhaps wider in your industry. So, one third of the people here say that we'll be the disruptors. But again, it's not surprising that this third one here, we know it's coming. So we know it's around the corner. We're not quite saying, yeah, bring it on, but we know it's coming. So that's great. So as you go through today, think about disruption not only as coming from outside, but coming from inside your business, because that's what I want to focus on today if you're talking about disrupting yourself. Okay, so thank you for doing that, Paul. That's the first bit of interaction. We're now going to go straight into another bit of interaction. And this one here is looking at your biggest strengths. So this one, we're not going to do it through a poll and we're not going to do it through the question box. What we're going to do is use this website called askgihan.com. So let me go there and let me demonstrate what I'd like you to do. So if you go to askgihan.com, which I'll just bring up on the screen here, and I'm asking you, what are your biggest strengths? So what I'd like you to do is, just double click anywhere in there and type in the title. For your title, I don't want your name. I want to type in, the title is your business. So for example, my business, one part of my business is conference speaking. And so what are my biggest strengths? Well, I've got a reputation in the market. I've got a really good keynote presentation. You don't have to do more than one. You could just do one. So please do that now. So just go on to askgihan.com and just type in, double click anywhere on the screen, which will allow you to type, and then make your contribution there. And we'll just see what we get. Okay, and I should be seeing it. Yep, listening skills. So I'd like to know what your business is, or what industry you're working in, because then we'll talk about that later. Okay, so double click somewhere else on the screen, on this page here, and type in what your biggest strengths are. Okay, let's see what we get. Okay, so business. Okay, not sure what business is. Coach, yeah, okay, coach. And in the comment where it says add comment, type in your strengths. Good, thank you for doing this. Okay, so business and professional services, coaching and training. So what are your strengths? Okay, I'd like to know what the strengths are, rather than just the word strengths. I'm not sure who did that. Yeah, creative thinking, good. Cultural flexibility, good. All right, I'm going to keep it going for a bit. Okay, good. Emotional fitness skills and programs, good. The traffic management one, I don't know who wrote that, but if you could just add a little, add what you think your strengths are there. Yeah, decision making, good. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so we've got a sample here that we can work from. I'm going to leave that open so that you can still work on that in the background before we get ready. While we keep going, I'm going to come back to that later because that's going to be really useful when we start looking at how those strengths can help us be ready for disruption. So let's continue. So I want to show you one more example of disruption, and it's an example that's a little bit closer to home. So if you run a business, you want to take credit card payments, and the way you used to do it was go to a big bank and set up a merchant facility. And I've been doing that. I've been doing that for the last 15 to 20 years. And I recently went to my bank to upgrade because they had a better offer, and I found it was quite difficult. But then I walked into Officeworks and I bought this little device called Square for $20, which allows me to turn my phone into a credit card merchant payment terminal. So I plug that little thing into my phone, and people can swipe their credit cards, and I can take credit card orders. And it's just as secure as a bank. It's just as secure for the customer, because I, as a merchant, never get to see their credit card details. They're not on file, but the money gets deposited into my bank account the very next day. So here's an example of another example of disruption, where something that was an institution, it is an institution still, the big banks, and now someone can get the same thing for $20 from Officeworks. So I reckon when anything goes into Officeworks, it's pretty much mainstream. So here's what happened. And this is what happens with most businesses. And this is why most businesses are vulnerable to disruption. Because what happens with businesses is their growth changes over time. So when they first start, they go on this curve, which I'm going to call FFF, and I'll explain that later, where the growth is pretty fast over time when they're just starting out. And then they get to a point where their growth still happens, but it happens slower. And I'm calling it SBE. And eventually they'll get to a decision point. It's either a decision point they make themselves, or it happens to them. And that's what disruption means. And they'll either continue on that SBE curve and their business will decline and maybe even die out, or they make the decision to go FFF again and their business will continue to grow. Okay, so this is typically what happens with most businesses, and it's happened for a long, long time. What's really happened now is that this whole curve has become compressed. It's happening a lot faster now, and there are a lot more things that will affect this decision point, which could be for you a disruption point. And you've got to decide: are you going to be in control of that? Are you going to be disrupted and have to make this choice, or are you going to make that choice for yourself so you can go on this FFF curve? Okay, so what does that mean? What's the FFF and SBE? Well, some of you may have heard me talk about this before. FFF is that our world has become faster, flatter, and freer. Faster means that we've got faster technology, innovations making things faster, and it's happening faster, and change is happening faster. Our world has also got flatter, so things like we've now got your next door neighbor can become a taxi driver. We've got access to global talent without having to necessarily have passports and visas. We've become a lot more social. Customers have access to each other, not just to our businesses. And of course, the price of things has gone down because we've got digital goods which are cheaper than physical goods. People can pool together to get for greater buying power, and people can collaborate to create more efficient markets. So if our world has become fast, flat, and free, and that's good, the opposite of that is slow, bumpy, and expensive. And that's that SBE that I was talking about. So most businesses start off being fast, flat, and free because they're working from nothing. So they just choose the best that's out there. But after a while, they build up resources, but they also build up things that hold them back. So they become slower, they become bumpier, and they become more expensive. And you might look at something that you're doing in your business that might be very successful, but it might be slow, bumpy, and expensive. And most businesses don't like to hear that they are slow, bumpy, and expensive, but actually, if they were being really objective, they are. So let me turn the spotlight back on myself for a moment, and I'll talk about my business. So a lot of my business at the moment is speaking at conferences. So I get booked to come and speak, to do a keynote presentation about the future, and somebody flies me in, puts me up at a nice hotel. I speak at the conference, and then I leave, and they fly me home again. So that seems like a good business, but it's very slow, bumpy, and expensive. Let me show you what I mean. So the whole cost of not just me as a speaker, but the whole event is a very slow, bumpy, expensive experience. For example, with my business, I have a 74-point checklist for how I go through each speaking engagement. And this is just one example, one item on my checklist. I don't need to go through this in detail, but the point I want to make is that any business that has a 74-point checklist for providing a service is vulnerable to disruption. Now, I do this because I want to provide a high quality experience for my clients, but that's just in my tiny little bubble. I know that I can deliver a great experience, but it could be that my whole industry becomes disrupted, and it could become disrupted, for example, by something like virtual reality. So, in the near future, on the not too distant future, people may not be attending conferences anymore. They might put on a virtual reality headset and there'll be a presenter, and they'll be watching a presenter who may or may not be live, but the experience will be similar to them being at the conference. They will feel like they're at a conference. They can turn their heads and look around, and there are other people at the conference with them. They can walk around that virtual space. If you want to get an example of this free app called Virtual Speech, which you can get at virtualspeech.com, and you have to have a virtual reality headset, gives you the experience of presenting in a conference room. So it's not the same as a live conference experience, but just try it. You'll be amazed at how realistic it can seem. So this was designed for people to teach public speaking and presentation skills. So presenters could practice their presentation as if they were in a conference room. So this is, you can be in a big conference hall, you upload your PowerPoint slides, and it's like you're walking around on the stage. You look behind you and you can see your slides changing, you press a button and your slides change, and you've got your audience in front of you. If you deliver in smaller conference venues like meeting rooms, then you can change the app also has a setting where you can be in presenting in a small meeting room, and you can even set it so that your audience is friendly or hostile. So the hostile audience is looking down at their phones, they're walking in and out, they're chatting to each other, and you experience what it's like to deliver a presentation in that context. So this is not going to replace in-person live conferences, this little app, but I'm sharing it with you because it's a really good example of how good virtual reality is. And still, it's not that good, but even so, it's not bad at all. So if you want to try it out, go to virtualspeech.com and just try it. And anyone who's presenting, I'm not just talking to people who are speakers and trainers and presenters, anybody in a professional environment who might have to deliver a presentation might find this app useful. Here's another app that actually is already disrupting a lot of trainers. So Brin, created by Dale Beaumont and his team, this fantastic free app which you can get on both Apple and so iOS and on Android, which is, as you can see here, the world's first artificially intelligent business advisor. So if you offer any sort of business training or coaching, you might be eventually disrupted by Brin, because Brin, so I can ask a question, how do I generate more leads to my business? And it will interpret that and then will take me to a resource built into the app, which will give me some advice. And the way that Brin works at the moment is that they're partnered with a number of speakers and trainers around Australia, New Zealand, and eventually the world. And they provide these video presentations with answers to your questions. So if you're providing any sort of training where you expect people to turn up to a training room, if you're providing any sort of coaching where people have to be available at a certain time and place to get coaching from you, then perhaps you might be disrupted or at least affected by things like Brin. Okay, so let me ask you the next question. Is there any part of your business that's slow, bumpy, or expensive? So I've got another poll here. And I hope I haven't scared you too much, because that wasn't my intent. But just to give you an example of how advanced some of this technology is. So this one here, you can actually tick more than one of the boxes. So is there anything in your business that you think is slow? It takes time to operate. People have to fly you there, or it takes time to make an appointment with you. Is it bumpy? So do the people have to jump through hoops to do business with you? I'm not just talking about compared to your competitors, but I'm talking about compared to the value that you deliver. Or is it expensive? So are you charging a lot of money? Is it that you charge a big upfront fee rather than charging a small monthly license fee? Okay, good. So I can see people voting. And as I said, you can tick more than one here. Okay, I'm almost ready to shut off the polls. Okay, good. So let me close the poll and share the results. So I'm really interested to see these results here, because most people have said slow and expensive. Yeah, that's right. So not many people have said bumpy, which is interesting. I think in many businesses, and bumpy maybe it's not as easy to understand. Is it not flat? So the flat world means that you get access, instant access to stuff. So it's not just fast access, but you've instantly got access to it. So for example, a couple of things that are bumpy in my business. That have made less bumpy are, for example, when somebody wants a copy of my photos, my introduction for the MC, blurbs to put into their newsletter, that's available on my website. They don't have to ask me or my PA to email that to them. So that will, if they did, that would be bumpy. They do have to, like, you might have a calendar online where people can book a date, pay a deposit straight away with just one click, and it's booked. That would be flat. Bumpy would be that they have to check with you whether there are dates available and so on. So are there any barriers to doing business with you? That's where your business becomes bumpy. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. So people are saying, okay, it's slow and expensive. So what can we do about this? What are you able to do? So what I'm going to do now is a little bit of exercise, and going back to the strengths that you shared earlier. So we're going to go through some of those and have a look at what we can do to look at making them faster, flatter, or freer. The one thing I want to say before we do that is that there's this quotation here that's been attributed to a number of people. It's often attributed to Mark Twain, but and it seems like it's not. No one's sure where it originally came from, but Josh Billings seems to be the best bet. And he says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And this is the point I was making about that growth curve, that businesses start off growing fast, and then they get to this point where they think, we know what's going to work, we know what works, we know what's going to continue to work, and it's mostly based on what used to work. So this is what I'm talking about. It's what you know for sure, but it just ain't so, especially now because our world is changing so fast. So let's have a look at some of those examples that we looked at earlier, of things that we talked about, strengths in your business, that maybe now they're things that we know for sure, but maybe just ain't so. So let me go back. Let me switch back to that screen where I showed you the strengths, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Okay, great. So I've got so this screen's coming up here. I want to just quickly check if, before I go into like workshopping a couple of these examples, does anyone have any questions about anything that we talked about? Well, the definition of fast, flat, and free, slow, bumpy, and expensive, the idea about whether this applies to your industry or not. I'd love to know. Okay, let me take a couple of examples here. So we'll pick one here. So he's a thought leader who's really good at facilitating training and building capability. So let me just give you one example. So by the way, if you're the person I'm speaking about here, again, don't automatically say yes, but that doesn't apply to me, or yes, but I can do this better. So be a bit more open to this. And because I don't know the people involved, I'm doing a little bit of guesswork here. But this is typically what I would do when I work with people in person, when I facilitate and mentor people through these sort of issues. So here's the thought leader who's really good at facilitating, training, and building capability. Great, but what about training? Well, maybe Brin will disrupt that. So people will have access to Brin, so they won't need to bring you in for training anymore. What about facilitating? So facilitating, I think, is actually a skill that's going to be really valuable in the future. And it may not be one that is as easily disrupted because you can't have a Brin that does it. However, there are now opportunities for people to do facilitation online. And just one example of the way that facilitation online works is it doesn't necessarily mean everybody's in the same room at the same time, which is the way that traditional facilitation works. So you could have, for example, a private Facebook group where somebody raised an issue and other people comment on it, and a skilled facilitator or moderator manages that discussion. But it doesn't have to be live, and it doesn't have to be right then and there. And you might say, well, that weakens the conversation, but in some ways it can strengthen the conversation. And what if you had an artificial intelligent facilitator who would then interpret the responses that are coming through, and then I might say something, somebody else might respond a couple of hours later, and this AI facilitator sends me a note or sends me an alert to my phone saying, oh, by the way, Jane commented on this, and this is what she said. Maybe you should talk about your the blog post that you posted 3 hours ago or 3 weeks ago, and I'll include a link to that. Do you, yes or no? And then you just tick a little box, and that gets posted into the facilitation block. So sort of facilitation group. So you can get things like that. So artificial intelligence is getting to the stage where it might be able to do that. Okay, let's move to the next one. So coach. So he's a coach. Who's got some great programs. Fantastic. Programs are great, but programs, if they're the same programs, if they're the programs that you built up over time, there's a good chance that you're improving the programs all the time, but you're probably improving them incrementally rather than throwing them all out and starting again, because it seems like such a waste. But maybe somebody else is going to come along, and if they were starting again and they were delivering exactly the same value that you were delivering, what they would do was something quite different. So maybe you're being held back by the value of your programs. Somebody doing business professional. Okay, here's another one doing coaching and training. Again, there are a whole bunch of skills that this person has, but again, there are services like Brin that will provide some of that training. There are a whole bunch of people coming out who are delivering online skills now, and I'm not sure whether it's online skills for training or online skills to get customers and clients, but let's say it's online skills for training. Then there are a lot of people now coming out with their own services, and they might be the leading edge because you're still working with what used to be current 3 years ago, or maybe even 3 months ago, but isn't anymore. Traffic management, I don't know enough about this one, but let's say you've got great skills in decision making. This is one area, decision making, that artificial intelligence is making huge advances with big data and predictive analytics. So no longer is decision making being made by experts who can analyze a situation. Decision making is being made by taking a whole bunch of data and then looking for patterns in the data. For example, as a Spotify subscriber, I get access to all the music in the world for $12 a month. And when I create a playlist, Spotify will recommend other songs that I might like based on the playlist. But it doesn't look at the genres and the artists and try to analyze my music styles and preferences. What it looks at is what other Spotify customers also listen to, and they match my playlist against other people who have got similar looking playlists, and they find other songs that they've chosen and they recommend those songs to me. So that's a very different kind of decision making. So it's not necessarily using expert analysis to make decisions. It's about using big data. And this is the one that I posted about myself, conference speaking. So my reputation might be holding me back from doing something really radical. My really good keynote presentation might be holding me back from designing something again from scratch, because I know how much work went into designing the really good one. Okay, so I hope you see some examples here of what I mean by this. By that, disruption is looking at your strengths and thinking about what if somebody else who didn't have those strengths came along and was willing to do something different. So I reckon you should do the same thing. I reckon you should be looking at making a list of the strengths that you've got in your business, your biggest assets, your biggest resources, and then figuring out what if they were actually holding us back. So if you had, and the way to answer this question is this: if you're starting from scratch and if you didn't have that strength anymore, then what would you do? And so if I didn't have my great keynote presentation, would I build exactly that keynote presentation again? If I didn't have this great coaching program and I had nothing, would I build that coaching program again? If I was doing traffic management and I had to find the best decision-making process, would I choose the one that I've got right now? Okay, so I hope that gives you some ideas into how to disrupt yourself. The question I want to ask you, though, is, for most businesses, we spend a lot of our time working in servicing our own clients and customers. And the real question is, how much time are you willing to spend on this side of it, on disrupting yourself? So I have got a survey here, a poll, and I've never run this one before, so I'm really curious to see what the answers are. So on this whole idea of disrupting yourself and looking at what you've got and kind of breaking it, which is hard work, but if you don't do it, somebody else will do it for you. How much time are you willing to spend on this? So the poll's coming up now, and I've got very broad grades here, up to an hour a month, up to a day a month, up to a week a month, or more than a week per month. This is purely on disrupting yourself. So it's not doing your core business, but it's disrupting yourself. Very curious to see the answers. Okay, thank you for voting very quickly. I'll leave it open a few more seconds. Okay, thank you everyone. So let me share the answers here. Right, okay, so most people, just over 50% are willing to spend up to a day per month in this area. And I reckon that's about right for me as well. So it doesn't have to be like a full day a month. It might be that you spend it over time. I reckon the people who say up to a week per month, that's really good, because it's a significant investment of your time. What we're talking about now, 20 to 25% of your time is going to be spent not just looking at serving what you can currently do, but looking at how you can go beyond that and disrupting yourself. And I reckon if you're in one of those two groups, up to a day a month or up to a week per month, that's pretty much okay. If you're not going to do as much as that, if you're only doing up to an hour per month, I think you're very vulnerable. And if you're doing more than a week per month, fantastic. If you can actually make that happen. And I reckon if you were one of those people who right at the start said, we're going to be the disruptors in our industry, then you've got to be up at that top level, more than a week per month. Okay, so there's actually a book called Disrupt Yourself by Jay Summit, and he says this, that every threat to the status quo is an opportunity in disguise. So I'd love you to think about disruption as something that's not necessarily a threat, but an opportunity. As I said earlier, disruption and innovation are pretty much the same thing. It's just that disruption is when it happens to you. Innovation is when you make it happen yourself. So I hope this given you some ideas. As I said early in the presentation, my friend Shane Kempton and I are running a new program called Business Accelerators, and the tagline for that is disruption by design. Because I talk a lot about disruption, Shane talks about building life and business by design. So we've combined these to run this monthly program. So the idea is that we spend half a day a month in person, and we choose a different topic around innovation and disruption. So it could be around customer centricity, getting the most of your talent, looking at disruptive factors. It's a whole bunch of things around the resources that you provide in your business. It's around some of the technology. So we'll look at things like big data and cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, driverless cars, and what impact that will have. And then we run a workshop on that, and we have some group mentoring. And what we want to do is build a community of innovators and disruptors, the people who want to be that top 10 to 20% who don't want to be disrupted, or ideally they might even be disruptors within the industry. The idea is that we'll spend half a day a month working together as a group with this workshop and the group mentoring, and generate some practical ideas that you can take away and use in your business. So we're running this in Perth. So we're doing it on the second Friday of every month. So if you're interested, the first 3 coming up until the end of the year, those are 3 dates. We're charging $300 a month, which is a bargain when you think about what you're getting for it. But actually what Shane and I have decided is for the first 3 months, anybody can come along for 1 session at nothing. So there's actually it's no cost. Just let me know afterwards when you're in the exit survey. Tell me if you're interested. So it's only for Perth people at the moment, or Perth-based people, or people who are willing to fly to Perth to do this. It's great value, and we're looking at expanding it around the country next year because we've already had interest from elsewhere. But both Shane and I are based in Perth, and so we're going to run it. We're going to start it off in Perth. If you're interested, go and check out businessaccelerators.com.au, and you'll find some more information about it. We'd love to see you there. It's not for everybody. So if you're thinking that your business is just going to be okay for the moment, or you're just hanging out for retirement, then don't come along, because you'll be frustrated by it. But if you're thinking that you want to be at the leading edge, and you know that change is happening and you want to stay ahead of the game, then please come along. You're the people that we'd love to have in our community. So coming back to that business growth curve, this is the biggest point that I want to make, that you can decide, are you going to be disrupted, or are you going to be the innovator who manages the disruption? So if you're just starting off in your business and you're going fast, flat, and free, great. What you need to think about is what you can do to keep going on that curve so that you don't fall into that slow, bumpy, and expensive. But I reckon most businesses, most established businesses at this stage here, growth is slowing because what got them there isn't going to keep you going unless you make this deliberate decision to make the decision point, bring it closer. So bring it earlier so that you can be the disruptor rather than being disrupted. So I really hope that you get value from that. I have one last story to share with you, and it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor around disruption and the timing of disruption. So if I ask you, if there's a grains of sand here, if I said to you, is this a heap of sand? I'm sure you'd say, yes, it is. It's a heap of sand, or I could call it a heap of sand. Now, if I take away one grain of sand from that, is it still a heap of sand? And you'd say, yes, it is. Of course it is. What if I take another and another and another? I could take hundreds, I could take thousands of grains of sand away, and you could say, yes, it's still a heap of sand. Now, just imagine if it got right down to just a few grains of sand on the ground, and then I said, is it a heap of sand? You'd say, no. But now let me ask you the question. When did it stop being a heap of sand? See, there's no exact point when that happens, and I reckon disruption happens like that as well. So we hear about disruption in other industries as something that appears on the news, or we read a blog post about it, or somebody tells us about it. But disruption almost never happens as something overnight. It's always one step at a time. So there's an industry and you lose a grain of sand, you lose a customer because they went to a competitor, or there's some new regulation that comes in and therefore clients disappear, or it opens up the market to others, or a startup company or an app comes along and customers go and use an app instead of using you. And all these grains of sand disappear one at a time. And all this time you might be thinking, I'm fine, I've still got a heap of sand, I've still got a heap of clients. But one day you'll wake up and you'll find that actually you don't anymore. And the point where it changed, you never actually know when that happens. But disruption happens slowly. It happens over time. It's not something that just you wake up one morning and your whole world has changed. There are always the warning signs and there are always the indicators. And I hope I've given you now a chance for you to be aware of some of those indicators and to prepare for some of them. So my last message is this: start before you're ready. Don't wait for things to be perfect. If you need to set aside the time to do it at the expense of other things, do it. Because this is one of those things where the world is not going to wait for you until you've got all your ducks lined up in a row. I wish you all the best with your plans to disrupt yourself. If you're setting aside up to a day per month, great, fantastic. I think that's a really good start. And if you're here in Perth and you want to spend half a day of that a month with us, then please come along to Business Accelerators. All the best with disrupting yourself and with growing your business. Thanks, everyone, and bye for now.